All right, welcome back to the Zero Weakness podcast. Camera's a little bit funky today. Someone has stolen my tripod attachment, so right now that camera is bouncing on a awkward packet of toilet paper. But we're going to make do. We're still going to record the podcast. Content is important, or something like that. Today's topic, I want to talk to you about peaking. And not necessarily peaking in the conventional sense of the mechanics of the peak, but I guess a little bit more about understanding the framework of peaking, how it works, and then how you can translate that into either a programming approach as a coach, a mindset approach as a lifter, and basically everything along those lines. Peaking is an interesting phase of training. The first thing we have to ask is, what is the purpose of peaking? Like, what are we actually trying to achieve in the peak? And if we're talking about powerlifting, peaking is powerlifting, right? Our training is not powerlifting. Our training is strength training. We are then taking that strength training and applying it to a very specific skill. In the context of powerlifting, that's 1 rep max of squat, bench, deadlift, right? Peaking is the art of the skill of expressing your strength in a very specific setting, a 1 rep max scenario on a specific day. That is what peaking is about. Now, there's a couple of things that then need to be understood as part of that. In a peaking phase, you are as strong as you are going to be. You've already laid down that foundation. In a peaking phase, you are not getting any bigger. You're not getting any stronger. Peaking is a game of practice and a game of timing. So with that said, a lot of people will write peaking blocks or tell themselves that they are starting to peak at a ridiculous amount of time out. I'm starting to peak, I'm 12 weeks out. You're nowhere near starting to peak at 12 weeks out. The true peaking act only takes 2 or 3 weeks. If it's taking longer than that as part of a peaking block, those weeks preceding the actual peak are not peaking. Right? They're transitioning into the peak. They're late strength phase sort of endeavors. It's important for us to understand that, because that's going to help some of the decision-making process when it comes to writing a program, when it comes to mindset around following a program, when it comes to peaking. So let me explain this a little bit further, right? Because we are not getting any bigger and not getting any stronger in a peak, because we're only practicing, we can ease our mind in terms of what happens during the peak in terms of performance. As you know, on any given day, you may be a little bit stronger, you may be a little bit weaker, right? In general strength training, day-to-day training, we're very rarely pushing to a point where there might be the possibility of failure. If you're doing your 5 sets of 6, if you're doing your 3 sets of 8, whatever, you're probably using a load selection that allows you to complete that task kind of regardless of how good you feel or not on that particular day, right? There's very little at stake in terms of failure. When you're working at top end percentages, when you're working at very high intensities, it becomes a little bit more volatile. The opportunity to fail is a little bit higher. That failure so often is quickly rationalized by the unaware lifter as, I'm not strong enough, I'm getting weaker, this hasn't worked, I'm not able to articulate the strength that I know I have, therefore the peak has failed, I'm going backwards, this is a disaster. You know, it goes into this negative spiral very quickly. The reality is you should be saying things like, I'm as strong as I'm going to be, this is a great opportunity for me to fail. On this day rather than competition day, I am in a phase of training where I know I can't make myself bigger, I know I can't make myself stronger, I'm literally just practicing a skill. What is that skill? That skill is the art of lifting really heavy for a limited number of reps. You can still do that irrespective of the number on the bar. You're not feeling great today, you can't hit that 300 kilo deadlift for a single, you go up to it, you fail, you don't have a cry and walk away. You look at it as, okay, I'm programmed 3 singles, maybe I just drop the weight so I can practice doing a really heavy single, because that heaviness is relative to your readiness on that day. It doesn't matter if it's 300, it doesn't matter if it's 290, it's not a reflection of how strong you have gotten, it's a reflection of what you're able to perform with on that day, what you're able to work with, and that might be extenuated by work factors, life stress factors, nutrition factors, sleep factors, all these other factors that might impact day-to-day performance often get exemplified and amplified during a peak, not necessarily because they weren't there in other phases of training, but because they're easier to see and feel when you're trying to lift as heavy as possible. Knowing that you are not getting any bigger, knowing that you're not getting any stronger, knowing that you are as strong as you're going to be at this point in time, we can take solace in that fact. We can celebrate the fact that we're having a bad day during the peak rather than on comp day. And then we can hone back in and think, what is the task at hand? What am I trying to achieve? I'm just trying to achieve this whole practice mindset, this whole hitting singles, doubles, whatever you programmed, and you can move forward with that. The same can be said with like an injury. Let's say you're 4 weeks out and you get a tweak. You feel a little pop in your shoulder. You get a little tear in your quad, a 1 centimeter tear, that's going to be easily healed within 4 weeks. If you get injured, if you run across, common things like the arm pain people get from low bar squatting when they go to bench, it's not that big a deal if you don't get every opportunity to practice during your peak, because it's not necessarily going to impact your true strength on the day of the competition. It might impact your ability to practice that skill, which could potentially be negative, but it's probably not that big a deal, especially if you're an experienced lifter. An experienced lifter is not going to lose skill that quickly versus an inexperienced lifter, right? And so again, we can take solace in the fact that, okay, well, we've experienced this problem. We may not be able to run the peak the way we were intending to, but that's not necessarily a reflection on our strength, right? On our strength doesn't disappear that quickly and that easily. Let me give you a tangible example, because I've got a lived experience of this with Pro Raw 11, which is the last Raw competition that I did, I believe. 4 or 5 weeks out, I tore my adductor magnus. So I was doing a squat, and on the 3rd rep, my adductor tore. That was pretty much the last session of my strength phase. I think I was up to triples. I was doing a triple. So it was the last heavy session, maybe the second last heavy session of the strength phase, the transition into peaking. So from that point, I was transitioning towards peaking, right? And so in my head, the logic was, if this injury can heal over the next 4 or 5 weeks and I can still get 1 or 2 practice sessions in, it shouldn't really impact my ability to express my strength on the competition day. Just knowing the principles and finding solace in them. I also have a unique and I guess a more mature mindset when it comes to injuries, because I've been injured a lot. I don't freak out about them. So it's kind of like, this has happened. This is what I can do. I can give myself the best opportunity to try and rehab and heal this thing in the time that I have. That's exactly what I did. I was still able to bench press. I was still able to conventional deadlift. And within 4 weeks, I was able to get at least 1 heavy squat and 1 heavy deadlift done during the prep. In the session that I tore the adductor, I was doing a 305 kilo triple squat, and I tore it on the 3rd rep. I didn't touch over 300 kilos. Sorry, that was the heaviest weight that I'd done in that entire prep, 305. On the day, I still squatted 345. So I was still able to express my strength on the day. Maybe I lost some skill. Maybe if I hadn't gotten injured, I might have squeezed out another couple of percent at the top end. I don't know. But what I was able to do is take solace, find comfort in the fact that I understood the process of peaking, understood that my strength work had been done. I wasn't going to get any weaker. I wasn't going to get any weaker in the days leading into the competition and the weeks leading into the competition, and as a result, then I could still, go into that competition with relative confidence and still perform quite well. And I did. Besides deadlift, I got injured warming up. That's a different story for another time. What I'm trying to say here is, again, like, the more we can understand and appreciate the principles of basically everything in training, but, in this case, peaking and programming, the more we can make an informed decision process, because so often peaking is like the importance of performing during the peak is so heavily inflated, and because of that, the mindset around failure during the peak is also amplified. So people who experience bad sessions during a peak are probably much more likely to talk themselves into bad performances on competition day, because they're putting too much stock into what happens in the peak. Instead, we need to look at it as the opportunity to practice I think I've said enough on this. I'm going to keep repeating myself if I keep going. But that is the sort of mindset that we need to take in terms of understanding the principles of peaking. This is really helpful as a coach when you're coaching people to understand this, so you can guide people through peaks that maybe are looking a little bit sour. This is really cool to understand as a lifter, so you can rationalize this to yourself if you're doing a peak and it's not going great. I hope that information is helpful. Send me a message. Tell me what you want to hear us talk about here on the Zero Podcast. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.